Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina. For those of you who are just tuning into this story, there's not much you need to know except that Marinette lost her memory, and it takes place before the events of Strike Back. If you would like to hear the story from the beginning, I'll leave the links in the description. But if you want to start from here, that's fine too, as this part of the story could stand on its own. Now on to the story. Chapter 8. Complicated Conclusions. Ladybug swung joyfully over the sun-bathed rooftops of Paris, enjoying the exhilarating rush of the wind flowing through her hair and delighting in the freedom granted by her suit. She stole a glance at her yo-yo in between throws to make sure she was staying on course, but it was more out of habit since she had come to know this way by heart. Since the big showdown with Shadow Moth, her life had fallen into a pretty predictable rhythm. Her parents kindly delivered her meals and talked with her about different memories or explained current events, then went down to work in the bakery while she rested or chatted with the Kwamis until it was finally time for patrol. For Marinette, there wasn't much to do aside from eat, sleep, and learn more about her life before the accident. But as Ladybug, suiting up gave her a sense of power and strength instead of helplessness, as well as relief from the miserable woozy ache of her head throbbing against her skull. Ladybug could go just about anywhere, help people with all sorts of things, make a difference, serve a purpose. And best of all, she wasn't doing it alone. Ladybug caught sight of a dark figure sitting on a flat roof and was pleased but not surprised to see Cat Noir was already waiting for her. He leapt up as she drew near, and Ladybug hid a smile as she saw his eyes light up with a cheerful eagerness that reminded her of a puppy, despite the 2 cat ears. He made a show of twirling his stick between his fingers before catching it back in his hand and sending her a playful look. "Hey there, Bugaboo." Ladybug turned to him in confusion. "Bugga what?" "Bugaboo," he repeated smoothly, a casual smile hiding the mischievous twinkle in his eye. "It's a nickname I have for you. You used to love it." Ladybug wrinkled her nose slightly. "I did?" Cat Noir laughed softly to himself before answering. "Actually, it used to drive you crazy. Which is why I did it," he added with a wink. "Now that sounds more like it." He shrugged, ignoring the pointed look she gave him, then asked cheerfully, "Are we doing patrol together today, or splitting up for part of it?" Ladybug tilted her head thoughtfully. Despite not being able to go to school herself, she knew it was a school night, and superhero or not, Cat Noir would probably have a lot of homework waiting for him at home, something she always tried to take into account whenever they made their plans, even though he always seemed to want to spend as much time on patrol as possible, regardless of other commitments. "Let's split up for the first section to cover more ground, then meet back at the Trocadero to cover the rest." "Sounds good to me." He readied his staff with a flourish, then sprung from the roof as he called, "Catch you later, Bugaboo." Ladybug shook her head with a smile as she swung herself off in the opposite direction. They must have been the really close, drive each other crazy kind of friends. She liked spending time with Cat Noir. Even though she only remembered knowing him for a few weeks, it already felt like they'd been together for a long time. And in a way they had. She flipped open her yo-yo mid-swing, checking the time and mentally planning the route she would take, deciding to end near the park, which would enable her to cover all the main checkpoints and still have a good chance of completing her section before Cat Noir finished his. She grinned, feeling her more competitive side take over as she began racing along the rooftops, stopping to check on particular citizens and keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble. She was nearing the end when her eyes caught sight of a billboard that made her gasp in shock. She lost control of her yo-yo and narrowly missed slamming into the edge of a nearby building before tumbling to the ground. Ladybug dusted herself off, then turned back to the poster with awkward curiosity. It was strange enough to see herself on a billboard, but even stranger to see herself kissing Cat Noir. Her cheeks burned at the thought, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. They looked so content, so oblivious to anything but each other. Her eyes widened and her hand flew over her mouth as she came to the obvious conclusion. They were in love. She thought back to her recent times with Cat Noir. The nicknames, the hand kisses, the way he looked at her as if she were his whole world. It all made sense now. She stared back at the picture. It was a little odd to think they had fallen in love without knowing the other's true identity, but they must have been through a lot together, and it's not like wearing a suit would change who they were deep down. Still, it was weird to think she and Cat Noir had been in love before she lost her memory. A sudden pang echoed through her heart. She realized how hard this must be on Cat Noir. The girl he loved had completely forgotten who he was, along with everything they'd experienced together. If only she could remember. A pulsing buzz sounded from her waist, and Ladybug jumped in surprise, tearing her eyes from the poster and glancing around self-consciously before realizing it was coming from her bug phone. She quickly opened it and found herself staring into the wide grinning face of Cat Noir. "Hey, Bugaboo, you're running a little late. Is everything all right?" Ladybug tried to avoid looking flustered and replied hastily, Yes, I'm on my way there. See you soon," she added, hanging up and beginning to swing herself in the direction of the Trocadero to join the former love of her life. No, her former self's love of her life. Now they were practically strangers. What was she supposed to do? Pretend she never found out? Go back to being a couple? How did that even work? Did her parents know? What if Cat Noir didn't want to be in love with her anymore? Why hadn't he told her about this? Did she even have feelings for him still? What would being in love with him be like? Her face flushed at that thought, and she almost lost her balance as the yo-yo slipped through her jittery fingers. Focus, Ladybug, focus, she muttered to herself, regaining control of her swings and hardening her gaze. He was just her partner. They were friends. Things would be normal. She would be normal. Ladybug pulled herself up onto the rooftop where Cat Noir was waiting for her, but she lingered near the edge instead of walking over to him as she usually would, her fingers still clenched tightly around her yo-yo. He didn't seem to notice the distance as he strode agreeably closer to her with a cheerful smile, resting his stick across his shoulders, then twirling it down with a flourish as he drew to a stop a few steps away from her. "So, Ladybug, how was your end of patrol?" Ladybug straightened and tried to pull off a convincing, unconcerned smile. "Nothing to report. You?" "Well, I helped a fellow feline out of a tree. Just in time, too. I think we were only a whisker away from catastrophe if Mrs. Garnier didn't have him returned sooner." Ladybug awkwardly gave a half-hearted chuckle at his attempt of a pun, then quickly changed it to a cough. "Well, we still have a lot of ground to cover and lost some time thanks to me, so you take the south side, I'll take the north, and we can meet up afterwards." Ladybug caught the slight flash of disappointment that flickered across his face as she leapt away, but she needed some time to sort things out and clear her head, something that was becoming increasingly difficult the closer she was to him. "But you said we could do this part together," he called as he folded after her, causing Ladybug to sigh inwardly at his persistence as she quickened her pace and pretended not to hear, despite the slight twinge of guilt that rubbed her conscience. When it became evident he wasn't giving up and instead was steadily gaining on her, she grudgingly paused and turned to wait for him. Just as he was nearing her position, an alarmed shout came from a few houses down, followed by a loud crack that echoed across the streets. Without hesitation, Ladybug bolted toward the sound, touching down on a rooftop just above a construction site, where a truck had backed into a massive advertisement sign that now tipped threateningly over a group of vehicles in the work zone. The top half snapped off from the main post and began hurling towards the workers just as Ladybug threw out her yo-yo to grab hold of it, causing it to jerk violently and slowing its descent, but Ladybug could feel her feet begin sliding dangerously closer to the edge of the roof. She realized she had miscalculated its weight, and since she'd wrapped her yo-yo solely around the unsuitably large object, she had nothing to use for leverage, causing her to rapidly lose ground as the enormous sign pulled her down after it. Just as she was about to slide over the edge, two strong arms encircled her from behind as Cat Noir extended his stick in front of them, using some nearby chimneys for support and preventing them both from being pulled off the building. She could feel the muscles in his arms straining from the exertion, and stiffened self-consciously as she stood pressed against him in a near embrace while he anchored them against the weight of the metal billboard. She shifted uncomfortably, knowing she was essentially trapped between the stick and her partner, but she quickly focused on the task at hand and carefully lowered the billboard to the ground while Cat Noir held them steady. The workers cheered as the sign touched the pavement, and Ladybug swiftly retracted her yo-yo back into her hand, muttering dryly, "You can let go of me now." Cat Noir gave a slight start before quickly relaxing his arms, and it occurred to her he had likely been squeezing his eyes shut the whole time. "Right, sorry." Ladybug's jaw tensed in annoyance, mostly at herself. It's not like he had done it purposefully to get close to her, and he had given her as much space as he could given the circumstances, not to mention saved her from a really nasty fall. So why was she so flustered and bothered by it? She needed to get a grip. She gave him a curt nod and sensed him follow her down to the construction site as they checked to make sure everyone was okay. They were about to leave when a man in a bright orange vest came running over to them, waving his arms excitedly.
"Ladybug, Cat Noir, can I get a picture of the two of you for my daughter? She would love it."
Ladybug hesitated, but Cat Noir shrugged agreeably. "Sure, why not? We'd be happy to." He placed a light hand on her shoulder and drew her close before striking a pose as the man took out his phone to take the picture. It was a good-natured and harmless gesture, something they'd done dozens of times before and nothing a friend wouldn't do. But now it made her overly self-conscious, and Ladybug felt her cheeks burn as she tried not to focus on the closeness of his presence. It seemed to take forever until the man had finally finished taking the picture, and Ladybug struggled to keep a believably cheerful smile frozen in place. But finally the man nodded that he was satisfied, and she stepped briskly out from under her partner's grasp. She nearly jumped in surprise as she felt another hand grab hold of her shoulder, but quickly regained her composure as she registered the middle-aged woman who had come up behind them, managing to only let out a slight twitch. Cat Noir raised his eyebrow at her, but Ladybug studiously ignored his gaze and turned her attention to the woman who had begun speaking to them. "We are forever indebted to you, Ladybug. You and Cat Noir just saved my company a lot of money in potential damages and lawsuits, not to mention the very lives of several of our crew members. I want to make it up to you. I'll write you a check, but I'm not sure how you want me to make it up for you. Or would you prefer it in cash?" Ladybug and Cat Noir glanced at each other for a moment. Then Ladybug shook her head with a kind smile. "That's very kind of you, ma'am, but we're superheroes. We don't do it for money." "Surely even superheroes need to save for college and have a place to sleep. I can give you both a very substantial sum." "We appreciate the offer, but even if we wanted to accept it, there's no way for us to store a large amount of money without drawing attention to our secret identities." The woman frowned skeptically. Cat Noir stepped forward and offered her a cheerful smile. "If you want to insist on paying us, you could donate the money to the local homeless shelter and services. I'm sure they could use it more than we would anyway." Ladybug's eyes widened slightly at the thoughtful suggestion, but nodded in agreement. The woman shook her head resignedly. "You two really are superheroes. Well, I'll be sure to do that if it's what you truly want." "It is," Ladybug replied, while Cat Noir nodded and shook the woman's hand gratefully. "Still," the woman continued, "surely there must be something I could do to thank you. What about—" Her voice trailed off as her eyes scanned the streets before lighting on a nearby ice cream parlor. "Surely even superheroes appreciate ice cream after a hard day's work. Please allow me to buy you some." "How could we say no to that?" Cat Noir said with a wink, as the woman placed a small bundle of euros in his hand to provide for the icy treats. The duo turned to leave, but stopped as the woman added, "Actually, could I take a picture of you two real quick? I'd love to share how our worksite was saved by the two heroes of Paris on our social media page, if that's all right." Cat Noir glanced at Ladybug, who obligingly struck a pose, then did the same as the woman took her camera out. Ladybug noticed he must have sensed her discomfort earlier, since although he leaned towards her, he kept a slight distance between them, and instead of reaching for her, he stood confidently with his arms folded across his chest. She realized she was staring at him and turned back to the camera, feeling a rush of warmth flood her cheeks, desperately hoping the woman hadn't taken the picture yet. She appeared to still be fiddling with adjustments on her phone screen, allowing Ladybug to relax into a relieved smile. "Done," the woman exclaimed, sliding the phone back into her suit pocket before chuckling softly to herself. "I have to say, for all the fuss people make, you really do look good together." Ladybug felt her jaw drop open before promptly shutting it, and was only vaguely aware of Cat Noir steering her shoulders away from the worksite and towards the ice cream parlor down the street. "Well, we really should be going. Thanks for the ice cream." After they had made a few steps away, she sensed him eyeing her carefully, as if to see how she would react to the woman's presumptuous comment, but she purposefully tried to appear as oblivious and casual as possible. A bell tinkled as Cat Noir pulled the door open for her, and they walked into the foyer of a small shop, the quiet whir of machines and ice crunching in the background finally filling the silence between them. "Looks like we're the only ones here," Cat Noir remarked, noting the empty tables with a casual curiosity, his ears twitching as the sound of someone shuffling about came from behind the closed doors on the other side of the counter. "We must have come at the perfect time. This place serves fantastic ice cream and usually has lines leading out the front door." Ladybug nodded passively, only half hearing him as her thoughts started to run away again in the quietness of the tiny storefront. What if this had been someplace they'd come often? What if this had been where they had spent their first date? Then again, Cat Noir seemed like the type to go all out for a first date. Probably something extravagant with roses and moonlight, or... Her eyes met his for a moment, and she quickly turned away, her cheeks warm with embarrassment, and she furiously tried to shake such thoughts from her mind. She barely knew him, not to mention he'd never said anything about having feelings for her. Sure, he was kind and supportive, even a little flirty now and then, but they were just friends. Now was not the time to be imagining a relationship with him, or anyone else for that matter. She lifted her chin with a slightly defiant confidence and wandered over to study the display cases at the front of the shop. Cat Noir followed closely behind, and she felt a growing surge of irritation towards him as he looked over her shoulder and commented on various flavors. Cat Noir? More like Puppy Noir, always trailing after her with those pitifully hopeful eyes and bouncing around with more energy and enthusiasm than a kid on his birthday. Couldn't he give her some space for 5 minutes? And did he really have to make that pun? What had she ever seen in him anyway? She suppressed an eye roll just as the back door swung open. "A ladybug? Cat Noir?" A long, thin man in a striped apron greeted them from a doorway behind the counter, quickly adjusting his glasses before hurrying over to the register. "It's a pleasure to see you. What can I get for the two superheroes of Paris this fine evening?" "Is it that late already?" Ladybug exclaimed, shooting a look out of the window and noticing the deep pink of the sky and the sun already beginning its descent. "Not to worry, milady. I know exactly how to speed this up." Cat Noir turned to the man with a smile. "I'd like a strawberry vanilla, please, and a double scoop of chocolate fudge and mint chocolate chip for Ladybug." Ladybug felt her jaw open slightly as she stared in shock at the boy in front of her. How did he know exactly what she'd been thinking about? Did he really know her that well? She clenched her fists in frustration, then interrupted cheerily. "Actually, I'll take that one," she announced, pointing to a random flavor closest to the register. "Ah, the blue cheese and buttered pear ice cream. That's one of our newest flavors. You'd be the first to order it." The tip of Cat Noir's mask lifted in amusement. Someone's adventurous today. Ladybug studiously ignored him and looked down at the small paper bowl of ice cream that the man placed in her hands, trying to dismiss the sinking wave of disappointment as she stared at the unappealing blob in front of her. She followed numbly as Cat Noir paid for the treats and led them both outside to take a seat on the small bench overlooking the Seine. Ladybug carefully scooped up a small portion of the strange ice cream and tested it out in her mouth. She resisted the urge to shiver, both from the cold and disgust as the bizarre flavor hit her tongue. It was a weird mix of bland and overpowering at the same time. Rich and creamy, yet almost tart with a sickly sweet aftertaste. Not the worst recipe she'd ever tried, but definitely not the flavor for her. Why hadn't she just gone along with what Cat Noir had said? "Enjoying your new flavor?" Ladybug glanced at her partner in surprise, seeing he'd already almost finished his, then nodded stubbornly as she scooped another large bite into her mouth. "You hate it, don't you?" Ladybug glared at him, about to protest, but couldn't help breaking out into a resigned chuckle as she caught sight of his teasing yet almost sympathetic gaze. "Okay, yes, it's terrible. I should have just agreed with what you ordered for me." Cat Noir laughed too, though he seemed to grow more hesitant as he shyly rubbed a hand against his neck. "Sorry, I didn't mean to assume or make you feel forced into anything. You just used to spend forever trying to decide which flavor to pick and always ended up going with that one, so I thought I'd try to make the choice easier for you." Ladybug's heart stung a bit as she thought of all the memories they must have made and lost together, and it was cut even deeper as she met the timid and almost mournful look reflected in her partner's eyes. "Ladybug, are you mad at me?" "What? Mad? No,
"Ladybug! Cat Noir!"
A voice bellowed from somewhere above them, and Ladybug's head shot up in alarm as a massive blast splattered a few inches away from their feet. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Ladybug was surprised at the dryness in his usually cheerful voice, but her heart quickly echoed the sentiment as a large snowman-like villain came into view.
"Strickler with his fancy machines and unbalanced flavors. There's no magic in his ice cream. You should have gotten your ice cream for me and me alone."
The two heroes sprang to their feet and readied their weapons, each spinning a protective shield in front of them as the villains sent hurling waves of ice cream pelting down in their direction. Ladybug glanced around for something to use for cover as Cat Noir confronted the large snow monster. Tell you what, Andre, since we like your ice cream better anyway, why don't you cool down and we'll stop by your stand instead? Sound like a deal? Ladybug and I'll even let you pick the flavors for us. I'm not Andre anymore. I am Glaciator, and I won't stop until all of Paris gets a taste of what true ice cream is. But how can anyone taste your ice cream if you turn them all into statues first? Ladybug grabbed Cat Noir's arm and pulled him out of the way just as Glaciator shot a powerful blast at the place where he had been. You can't reason with him, Cat. The only way to stop him now is to find the object where the Akuma is hiding. Cat Noir sighed as he easily broke into a run, keeping pace beside her while they dodged between cars and buildings, trying to lead the battle to a more neutral location. I know, but at least I can say I tried. Learned that from you, actually, he added breathlessly, somehow managing a smile despite the perilous situation they found themselves in. He certainly had a lot of guts, she had to give him that. She found her own stress easing just as a small voice gave a cry from the other side of the street. Help, please! Somebody help me! Cat Noir swiftly diverted toward the sound, Ladybug close on his heels as a torrent of paralyzing snow cones continued to rain down around them. Ladybug, Cat Noir, help! A little girl was huddled under a small awning, her face streaked with tears, and Ladybug gasped as she took in the stiff pink figure in front of her. That must have been the girl's mother. Ladybug used her yo-yo to shield them as Cat Noir knelt down beside the young girl, his voice soft and tender as he said kindly, It's okay, little princess. You know who we are? The girl sniffed, her hands clinging tightly to a small stuffed bear as she answered, You're Cat Noir and Ladybug. Ladybug kept her eyes focused on scanning for danger, but she didn't miss the soft smile he offered as Cat Noir nodded encouragingly. That's right, and Ladybug and I are going to fix everything. There's nothing to worry about. You want to hang out with us for a while? The girl nodded cheerfully, choking back a sob as she ran into his arms, her hands clasping tightly around his neck. Cat Noir lifted her gently and turned to Ladybug, who motioned that they needed to keep moving as the ground trembled and the air took on an icy chill. You can't hide forever. My ice cream will find you whether you want it to or not. We'll see about that, Cat Noir whispered to the girl confidently, winning a hopeful smile as she cuddled closer against him. Ladybug smiled as the little girl gave a small wave in her direction, then quickly followed Cat Noir as he began leaping over the rooftops, keeping to the shadows as they tried to stay out of sight from Glaciator. It was going to be much more difficult now that they had a civilian to keep with them. The girl would slow them down, but they couldn't just leave her like that. And Ladybug couldn't help but admire the natural and friendly way her partner had handled the situation. They ducked behind a tall chimney and Cat Noir turned to Ladybug. Think we lost him? Ladybug glanced around, then nodded affirmingly. It won't be safe for long, though. What should we do with her? She asked quietly, feeling slightly guilty as she met the girl's wide brown eyes. I know of the perfect place not too far from here. The Dupe and Changs are really good people, and I'm sure they won't mind taking her in. Plus, they have tons of delicious treats, and knowing Mr. Dupin, I'm sure he'll stuff this sweet little face full of a pastry or two, he added, running a playful finger along the girl's nose and causing a burst of quiet giggles. Does that sound like something you would like? The girl nodded, a cheerful sparkle lighting across her face, and Cat Noir smiled reassuringly. It's settled then. To the best bakery in Paris. Ladybug shook her head with a laughing smile as Cat Noir excitedly sprung into a more elaborate jump, all while being careful to look out for his precious bundle and sticking to the safer parts of the rooftop trail. Cat Noir was right. Her family's bakery was the perfect place to bring the kid. Her parents would undoubtedly jump at the chance to spoil and watch over the little girl, and hopefully it'd keep them distracted enough to avoid them checking up on their own daughter. Any plans for getting out of this ice capade, m'lady? Ladybug smiled wryly as she raced along beside him. Well, I don't think telling him to chill out is going to help much. Cat Noir pulled her behind him and spun out his stick as a new torrent of paralyzing slush rained down on them. Oh, come on, he's a giant ice cream snowman. He should have appreciated that one. Ladybug let out a slight chuckle, but it was getting harder to stay positive as each road became flooded with ice cream pellets, and she could feel the stress and pressure rising with each frozen citizen they passed. Cat Noir must have sensed it too, because even his smiles were beginning to seem more forced than usual. As expected, her parents had been more than happy to shelter the girl they'd found, and Ladybug was relieved to know she'd be in good care. But how many other children had their parents frozen in front of them and were now crying alone tonight? They had to fix this. Ladybug straightened as she stilled her yo-yo. Actually, I'm thinking it's time we heat things up. Lucky charm! The dark night sky came to life as a swirl of magical energy pulsed above them and a small narrow object dropped into Ladybug's hand. A knitting needle? What am I supposed to do with this? Poke him? She stared at the needle in dismay, then felt a hand clasp her wrist as her partner pulled her down to duck behind a car, just as the icy villain appeared in front of them from around the corner.
You can't run from destiny, young heroes. My ice cream will warm even the coldest of hearts.
That doesn't even make any sense, Cat Noir hissed in a frustrated whisper, his head peeking above the car just enough to keep his eyes on the villain, while Ladybug examined the strange yet familiar tool her lucky charm had given her. Neither does this. I don't think a sweater would be enough to warm up that giant mound of ice cream, and even if it was, I only have one needle and no yarn, not to mention making it would take forever. What about a scarf? Then at least it'd be easier to wrap this up. Ladybug's face brightened, and she turned to get another look at the villain. That's it! Has the snowman guy always worn a scarf? Cat Noir glanced around the car, too. No. Now that you mention it, I don't think I've seen him wear one before. That must be where the Akuma's hiding. It's gonna be hard to get to, though. Her excitement faded as she eyed the massive fist still shooting bolts of ice cream in every direction, along with the angry scowl that sent a freezing chill across the streets. Cat Noir cleared his throat. Actually, there might be a way we can get close enough to take it, without him firing at us. Ladybug turned to him in surprise. Really? How? He lowered his eyes and rubbed his neck uncomfortably. Well, the first time we fought this guy, we found out he has a thing for people in love, particularly us, so we could pretend to be a couple, and he should leave us alone till we make it over there. Pretend? Ladybug ducked her head and turned away as an unexpected pang pierced her heart. Were they not a couple after all? Had the scene on the billboard only been an act as well? But no, the gentle love and blissful contentment across their faces and the careful way they held each other couldn't have been fake. More likely, Cat Noir didn't want to make her uncomfortable by suddenly explaining they'd been together before her accident, and was trying to be respectful of her newfound boundaries. He was so thoughtful and kind. She felt herself relax as she glanced back at him and realized he was still talking. He must have taken her silence differently as he hurriedly stumbled over his words in an attempt to explain things further. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything, serious, and if it makes you uncomfortable, we can always try something else. But just holding hands should be enough to distract the villain in order to get closer to him, and then we can make a break for the scarf. But I mean, if you don't want to. Ladybug cut him off with a reassuring nod. Let's do it. Cat Noir blinked in surprise at her ready acceptance, and his eyes widened doubtfully. Are you sure? 'Cause after earlier I thought... Ladybug stood up and stretched out her hand to him with a soft smile. Ready when you are, my love. His mouth opened slightly, then quickly closed as a light tint of pink dusted his cheeks for a moment as he rose beside her and carefully closed his fingers around hers. She was surprised by how naturally their hands fit together, and how mindful his hold on her was. She'd expected it to be like holding a child's hand, clingy or reluctant, and something that needed to be guided in the right direction, the way faint understandings from a past life had told her it would be. This was different. His hand clasped lightly around hers, and instead of being hesitant or needful, it was sheltering, full of care and protection, like one would wrap their hands around a baby chick, or close around something infinitely precious and valuable. He still seemed nervous about her commitment to the plan, his shoulders tense and his eyes darting back to hers uncertainly. She felt an aching warmth rise in her chest, and was filled with a desire to make sure he never looked so hesitant and forlorn ever again. She smiled up at him, then closed her eyes contentedly as she slipped her other hand through his arm and leaned her head affectionately against his shoulder. He stiffened slightly at her touch, then relaxed as he began leading them toward their appointed target. Ladybug opened her eyes to keep track of the ground in front of them, and marveled at how easy it was to match his confident, steady strides, and how much it comforted her to remain safely tucked against the strength and reassurance of his side. She glanced at the red and black fingers linked together, as even through their gloves she could feel the tender warmth emanating from his hand and the faint pulse that echoed between them, and she couldn't help a soft smile as she imagined all the times they must have done this before. She hoped Cat Noir felt as cherished as he made her feel. He of all people deserved it. He was so kind and gentle, but also funny and brave. He had a strength and confidence that refused to give up even in the darkest of circumstances, and he was constantly thinking of others before himself. He was her partner and her friend, a loyal shelter and comforting shield to everything the world threw at them. How could she not fall in love with him? Perhaps she had begun to already. Ladybug's eyes wandered toward their target. Just a few more steps. Her heart sank, knowing their special moment would have to come to an end, but hopefully it was one they could repeat again soon, without the threat of a giant snowman towering over them. Just as Cat Noir had predicted, the icy villain had been too invested in oohing and awing over them to realize they had strategically been drawing within reach of his Akuma object, and without a second thought, the two heroes burst into a running leap and pulled themselves up onto the giant ice cream man, seizing a hold of the enormous scarf as Ladybug pierced her long needle into it, then slid back to the ground, using gravity to unwind the rest into a jagged pile beside them and freeing the Akuma inside. The mass of ice cream melted into a purple bubbling goo that soon evaporated, revealing a portly man in a striped shirt who peered around the street with a look of confusion. Not wasting a moment, Ladybug threw the needle up in the air. Miraculous Ladybug! In an instant, the dark sky lit up as thousands of magical ladybugs swirled about, repairing the damage and bringing people back to their normal selves. Ladybug smiled in relief as a mother embraced her formerly frozen children and knew somewhere a little girl was being reunited with her mother too. Nice work, partner. Pound it? Cat Noir asked, extending his fist to her. Ladybug lifted her fist to meet his, but noticed his smile was slightly pained, and the emphasis on the term partner didn't slip by her either. Pound it. She was about to say more when they were interrupted by large sweaty hands weighing around their shoulders. Ladybug, Cat Noir, was I akumatized again? Ladybug stepped subtly from beneath the man's grasp as they both nodded in solemn confirmation, and the man lowered his head disappointedly. I'm sorry. Normally I don't care who goes to which ice cream, but when I saw the two of you... Forget about it, Adrien. Cat Noir cut in, placing a hand on the large man's arm and steering him toward his cart, which happened to be close by. You don't have to worry about Ladybug and me. And besides, everyone in Paris knows your ice cream is legendary. Aha! Legendary! That's a good one, Cat Noir. Ladybug raised an eyebrow as Cat Noir only gave the man a half-hearted smirk, then flung himself up to the nearest rooftop, and after a small wave to Adrien, Ladybug did the same. Is it just me, or is he more exhausting than that pigeon guy? Ladybug giggled slightly, taking in her partner's irritated stance and huffy expression. How could someone so fierce and frustrated still look so adorable? She knew he was truly unnerved by the confrontation with the ice cream guy, but despite his crossed arms and exasperated frown, the slightly rounded cheeks and pouty kitten eyes made him look all the more endearing. The sound of her laugh seemed to put him at ease, and he relaxed, letting out a small chuckle himself. Anyway, I should probably get going, and you don't want your parents to worry. Have a good night, m'lady. He was about to leave, and Ladybug felt a piece of her heart rise to go with him as she called out, Cat Noir? He paused, and she felt a wave of reassurance wash over her as he turned attentively, and Ladybug stepped closer to him. The faintest hint of a gasp escaped his throat as she pulled his hand into her own and gave it a tender squeeze. Ladybug glanced away shyly as she said, I know how hard it must be for you to see me like this, without my memory, and I wanted to thank you for being so patient and encouraging toward me. She looked up at him with a smile and added, I may not remember everything we've been through together, but I do know that you're very special to me. She raised herself on her tiptoes and gently kissed his cheek before quickly flinging her yo-yo across the street and pulling herself into the sky, leaving Cat Noir to lift a stunned hand to his face. Chapter 9. Can't Lie to a Friend. Cat Noir checked his baton again to make sure he got the message right. Are you free tonight? I have a surprise for you. Meet me on the roof of this address so we can catch up a bit. XOXO, Ladybug. XOXO? That was new. This whole message seemed very unusual and frankly confusing. Not that he wasn't looking forward to a surprise.
especially one from Ladybug, but the cat pun made it almost too good to be true. He still wasn't sure what to think after yesterday. Things had started off normal and fine, but after the whole construction incident, Ladybug had seemed really tense and on edge. He had wondered if she was mad at him, since it almost seemed like she'd been trying to keep her distance. But then when they fought Glaciators, he'd willingly jumped at the chance for them to hold hands. To win the battle, of course. However, it almost seemed as if she truly enjoyed being close to him, and was reluctant to let go. And she'd called him my love? He knew she'd only been teasing and was trying to make light of the situation, but she'd said it so affectionately and meaningfully, and after her parting last night, for a moment he hoped she actually might have meant it. Cat Noir shook his head. The real, or memory-filled Ladybug had held his arm during their first fight with Glaciator too. He even added a kiss with it, but still hadn't been in love with him. It was high time he took her feelings into account and didn't jump to conclusions at the slightest touch of her hand. He steeled a ready smile on his face, and after a quick breath of night air, felt it slip into a real one as his heart immediately lightened. He was going to see Ladybug, his partner, his closest friend, and she had a surprise waiting for him. Cat Noir stepped carefully onto the abandoned rooftop as he gazed in wonder at the scene before him. Bits of ribbon weaved their way along the side rails, and a small table was set between two elegant chairs in the center of the narrow roof. Candlelight danced over a small feast of pastries and cheese platters, and two silver-white plates glimmered, waiting to be filled. "Surprise," Ladybug said gently, stepping out of the shadows, a hesitant but hopeful smile playing across her face. "I wasn't sure exactly what you liked, but I figured I couldn't go wrong with some traditional bread and cheese." He gave her a confused smile as she led him over to his seat, his feet still moving as if in a daze. "Do you like it?" "Well, yes, but—" "Oh, wait!" Ladybug stooped over and picked something off the ground. "I wanted to put this by your plate, but the wind keeps blowing it off the table. Here." She smiled at him, and his eyes widened as he caught sight of the deep red petals of a thornless rose. Realization sprung through his mind as he quickly stepped away from the chair and gently pushed the rose aside. "I'm sorry, Ladybug. I can't accept this." She flinched, and he hated seeing the look of confusion and hurt that washed across her face. "What? But why not?" "Because—" Cat Noir felt his heart wrestling within him and touched the back of his neck reluctantly. "You're in love with someone else." Her eyes narrowed and she tilted her head doubtfully. "How could I be in love with— there was a billboard that showed us—" Cat Noir wanted to smack his forehead. Of course. That stupid billboard. Would it never stop causing him trouble? He looked back at Ladybug and shifted uncomfortably, his face lined with sympathetic apology. "Actually, we don't really know how that happened. A villain erased both our memories that time, and we've kind of become Paris's favorite couple ever since. Even though you made it clear we never were one," he added, watching closely to see how she'd take the news. "So you mean—" Her hands flew over her mouth as she grasped the situation more fully. "Oh, Cat Noir, I'm such a fool. I'm so sorry." "Hey, don't be so hard on yourself. You lost your memory, so being the clever girl you are, you take note of visual clues. How else are you supposed to know what's going on? It's not your fault some billboard spread misinformation. I probably would have thought the same thing." He tried to place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but she stepped away. "Thanks, Cat. Though I should probably be going. Let's just forget this ever happened." She flashed him a quick smile, but he noticed the tears that had welled up in her eyes as she readied her yo-yo to swing into the darkness beyond. "Milady, wait." He caught her gently by the wrist, and she slowly turned to face him, her eyes still directed toward the ground. "I've been in love with you since the day we met." Ladybug froze, and he stepped closer to her, slipping his hand down her arm as he took a careful hold of her fingers. "I've always dreamed of sharing an evening like this. Ever since our first day together, I've treasured every moment I spend with you, and tonight is no different. My love for you hasn't changed, and never will. It's just that, if you did fall for me, I'd want it to be because you chose to, not because you felt the decision had already been made." His words had fully caught her attention, and as he spoke, she slowly lifted her head to meet his gaze. He smiled fondly as she stared up at him for a moment, a light blush peeking out from under the tips of her mask before she ducked her head with an appreciative smile. "You're a good kitty, you know that?" He gave her hand a light squeeze, then turned to face the table she had set up for them. "Speaking of good, it'd be a real shame to let all this delicious food go to waste. Will you join me?" She hesitated, but nodded with a shy smile. He guided her to a seat, then sat down across from her as he helped himself to some of the many treats. "Did you know we've had to fight villains with food before? One time." Ladybug felt her heart lighten as the rest of the evening went by in a peaceful, grateful blur. Her gaze never strayed far from the captivating green one sitting across from her, and she smiled and laughed as she listened to him talk about old missions and how cleverly she used her lucky charm, each story tinted with admiration and praise, yet casual and comfortable as they filled the time between them with a closeness that was completely freeing, like a chat between old friends. After a while, they decided it was time to head back, but to her surprise, Cat Noir stayed to help pack up the leftovers and undo the decorations, carefully adding them to the large basket she'd brought everything in. "Milady, I know your powers are mysterious and magical, but how in the world did you bring these chairs up with you?" Ladybug laughed at the exaggerated bewilderment across his face and motioned to an empty section of the wall on the other end of the rooftop. "This used to be a restaurant, but since it's abandoned now, I figured no one would mind if we used a few of their chairs." They each took one and carefully placed them back against the wall before glancing over the area to make sure they hadn't missed anything. Ladybug sighed as the weight of her mistake flooded over her again, and she turned to her partner appreciatively. "Thanks for being so understanding through all this, kitty. I know I really made a mess of things and never meant to play with your feelings. I may not remember everything, but I do know that you're more than just a partner. You're my friend, and you'll always be very important to me." Cat Noir stared at her for a moment, and she worried that he might not have forgiven her as easily as she thought, but then he drew closer as his face relaxed into a tender smile. "Of course, Ladybug. Your friendship means everything to me, and I think I should be the one to give this to you." Ladybug let out a light gasp as he placed something in her hands, and the soft petals of a scarlet rose brushed across her fingertips. "As a thank you for the lovely evening," he said gently, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek. "Besides, it goes with your costume," he added, smiling lightly before leaping off into the night. Ladybug turned in stunned silence and watched the figure disappear, before glancing back at the flower in her hands, knowing the dark rose held far more than just gratitude and thankfulness. Thank you all so much for all of your patience and still being invested in the story despite it being a year late. This was actually the idea for the story that started this whole series, because I don't even know how it happened, but basically I was just thinking, what if the ladybug from Oblivio, who kind of, without her memories, was a little more confident, a little more happy, but didn't have a clue of what was going on, went and saw the Billboard from Glaciator 2.0, which caused that whole trouble, and what would she think of that? And how would she kind of react? And what if Cat Noir had to be the one like in Glaciator 1, where he had to tell Ladybug that she was actually in love with someone else? I don't know why my twisted brain thought that would be a cool idea, but it was, and I'm really glad I finally finished it. It's not exactly how I imagined it, but it is pretty close, and so I'm really glad I had a chance to share with you. Now I should stop rambling, but I can't even believe it's been a whole year since I came out with this story. Like, hopefully I have the next part fully written. I definitely plan to record it as soon as I have quiet time in this house, which is very rare. If you want to come with me, I'll just show you how loud it is at this very moment. It makes no sense. I have no idea how we can't be quiet, but I'll show you.
Drop the thingy, and you'll drop your his.
Anyway, all that to say,
Thank you so much for sticking with me and listening to this story. I hope it makes your day a little better. And stay tuned for the next one, which should hopefully be coming out in the not-too-distant future. Love you all. Hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.